So, hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. Today is 3rd September 2024, and today we have some important articles for the discussion, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important articles. And you all knew that yesterday I have given one prelims practice question, and the question was the household consumption expenditure survey is an important tool for understanding the spending patterns of households in a country, and who is responsible for releasing household consumption expenditure survey in India. So this was the question that I have given to you in yesterday's class. The options are the Reserve Bank of India, option B, National Sample Survey Office, and option C, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and option D, Ministry of Finance. So the correct answer for this question is option B, National Sample Survey Office. And in fact, this National Sample Survey Office is responsible for releasing the household consumption expenditure survey in India. And if you look into the explanation part of this household consumption expenditure survey, so this National Sample Survey Office, which is also called as NSSO, and it is under the administrative control of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, has been regularly conducting the household consumption expenditure survey since its establishment in the year 1950. And in fact, recently the National Sample Survey Office has conducted the household consumer expenditure survey from August 2022 to July 2023. And in fact, so you can also go through some of the details of household consumption expenditure survey that is being conducted by the National Sample Survey Office. Okay, so today another very important prelims practice question. The question is, state of the global climate report is published by which of the following organizations? And the options are option A, United Nations Environment Program, option B, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and option C, World Meteorological Organization, and option D, German Watch. Right, so this is also a very important question, because in recent times environment and ecology section and even climate change section, the weightage of number of questions being asked has been increasing. So therefore, in this context, this question is also very important for your examination. So try to answer this question in the comment section. And the first article that we are going to start this discussion is with China-Africa Forum and the lessons that India can actually learn from China-Africa Forum Summit. And we all knew that both China and India have been competing for influence in the African continent, because Africa as a continent which is earlier known as the dark continent, Africa was earlier known as the dark continent, but now it is being called as the continent of hope because of the lot of advantages Africa holds for other countries. And in fact, both China and India have been competing for the influence in African continent. However, in this context, when you look into the competition between India and China over dominance or presence or even influence in Africa, so China is in a much advantaged position compared to India. So however, so recently a forum on Africa China cooperation is to take place from September 4-6 2024 in Beijing. So however, India can actually track this forum on China-Africa cooperation, and India can also learn some lessons from this particular China-Africa forum that is going to be held in Africa in Beijing, so 4-6 September this year. So as I have already told you that Africa is known as the continent of hope, right, because of number of advantages, continent of hope. So because of number of advantages that Africa actually holds. So when I say what are the advantages, Africa can ensure global food security, and Africa is located at a place called it is mostly located in a tropical region, and therefore it could also ensure the energy security, or it could also generate a huge energy because of its vast land, food security, energy security, and nutrition security for the world. And Africa has a huge demographic dividend, and it is a potential place for investment. Huge demographic dividend in Africa. And apart from demographic dividend, so Africa is a place for India's investments. And we should not forget that Africa is rich in mineral resources. There are several critical minerals, and most of these several critical minerals are located in African continent, whether it is natural gas, crude oil, or lithium, cobalt. So all these minerals are located in different parts of Africa. And apart from that, we should not neglect the strategic dimension or strategic importance of the African continent, because it is strategically very important location. And when we talk about the Indo-Pacific region, where India is a central role to play, and in the entire Indo-Pacific region, Africa could play a very important role, because the western borders of the Indo-Pacific region extends up to the eastern borders of the African continent. So therefore, in this context, because of all these reasons, and there are several other reasons also, African continent is a very important continent. And because of this reason, African continent is known as continent of hope. And that is the one reason that both India and China have been competing with each other. But on the other hand, China as of now has a deeper influence, deeper presence in African continent compared to India. So therefore, this particular Forum on China-Africa Cooperation is going to be held from September 4 to 6, 2024, and India could actually learn some lessons from this particular summit or this particular forum. And in fact, the other thing that we need to understand is this event comes at a time when African nations have been grappling with or facing number of challenges or multiple issues, such as most of the African countries have been experiencing higher levels of inflation, and there is also a currency depreciation and devaluation has also been taking place, and there is a debt burden, particularly Chinese debt trap diplomacy, and number of African countries owed a lot of debt to another countries, and a lack of constitutionalism, stable governments, and even most of these African countries in recent times have seen the military takeovers. And apart from these challenges, internal challenges within the African continent, so Africa as a region will also face challenges from other geopolitical challenges, such as Israel Hamas, which is not too far from the African continent, and Russia-Ukraine wars, and even attacks by Houthi rebels on commercial shipping in the Mediterranean Sea. And these are the challenges that the African continent as a region would be facing. So these are certain challenges. So however, moreover, a sense of summit fatigue. So summit fatigue in the sense that in recent times, African continent and African region has been participating in number of such summits with other number of countries, and which has resulted in the summit fatigue for the African continent. So this summit fatigue has seeped into the mindset of the African leaders following the multiple recent Africa Plus One summits. Now this kind of Africa Plus One summits were held recently with Turkey, Russia, South Korea, US, and even several African leaders summit. So US African Leaders Summit was held. So this kind of summits are known as Africa Plus One summits, and that a number of summits with these countries have been holding with the African continent has resulted in summit fatigue for the African continent. And in fact, there are a lot of African priorities in this forum on China-Africa conference. So we will try to understand what are these African priorities, what they will actually prioritize in this particular summit, and what India can actually learn from the key takeaways of this forum on China-Africa conference 2024. On the economic front, one thing that we need to understand is that progress on Beijing's ambitious goal to import around 300 billion worth of goods from African countries between 2022 to 2024 has been modest. So this, in a way, that essentially means that Beijing or China wanted to import around 300 billion worth of goods from African countries between the year 2022-2024. However, this particular goal of Beijing and African countries have not achieved, and in fact, the China-Africa trade increased to $167 billion, and in fact, out of this 167 billion US dollars, about 2/3 of the trade is dominated by the raw materials alone. So there is no significant value addition in the trade. And developing a sustainable and robust agricultural industry would be another very important priority for all these African countries. So in fact, one thing that we need to remember is that Africa is a developing continent. It is not a developed continent, or African continent consists of countries which are primarily underdeveloped or developing, and primarily the economies in Africa are dependent on agriculture, right? So they're primarily dependent on the primary sector. So therefore, in this context, the African countries' priority would be developing a sustainable and robust agricultural industry, because agriculture would provide livelihood opportunities for the large section of Africa's population, and it could have the potential to bring number of people out of the poverty cycle, and it would also improve the living standards of people in African continent. And because of that reason, sustainable and robust agricultural industry is an imperative for the African continent. And apart from agriculture, trade is also another important priority topic for Africa in this forum on China Africa Conference 2024. And in fact, countries such as India and China, which actually have similar experiences of small scale farming, so they could actually step in and develop crops, fertilizer, pesticides that are suited to the African conditions. Now, why countries like India and China could actually step in and help support these African countries in developing crops, new crop varieties, fertilizers, pesticides, and that well suited for the African conditions? Because it would be a win-win situation. It would generate a lot of goodwill on those respective countries, because it generates it would lead to the capacity building of the population. It would ensure food security, and it would ensure nutrition security. It would provide employment opportunities for the people in African continent, and it would improve the living standards of the people who are living in the African continent. Because of all these reasons, it would build a long-term partnership, and the long-term partnership which is based on the trust and mutual respect and confidence. So therefore, because of that reason, India and China have relatively a good expertise, and even a knowledge technology, so that it can be transferred to the African countries, so that the African countries can actually benefit from the expertise of India and China. So however, China African debt, so as I have already told you, China very often follows the policy of debt trap diplomacy, right? So it usually gives a huge amount of debt, but very often the terms of debt are unsustainable in nature. There's no transparency and no accountability when it comes to Chinese debt to other countries, particularly the African countries. And most of these African countries also owe a lot of debt to China as well. Now, China and African debt, and what India can actually learn from this particular debt relationship between China and Africa. And in fact, China's role in African debt sustainability is highly complex. And in fact, Chinese loans to African governments and even regional institutions actually amounted to around 170 billion between 2000 to 2022. So this is the total debt that the African countries or the African continent collectively owe to the China. And in fact, African countries will also continue to de-emphasize on aid. So they will never emphasize on aid, rather they would emphasize on a sustainable means of financing the infrastructure development projects, and even further giving a sustained push to the trade between India and trade between China and Africa. So they will focus on trade facilitation and even aggressively pursue product value addition. So remember, as I have already told you, when we talk about the trade between China and African countries, so $167 billion of trade between these two regions. So however, so 2/3 of the total $167 billion of trade is in the raw materials only. So therefore, the African countries would look to aggressively pursue the product valuation, and product valuation would certainly benefit the African continent. And in fact, so when you look into the Indian model, so Indian model and Indian way of doing business with the African continent, African continent, it has its own comparative advantages in certain sectors, particularly the information and communication technologies and human resources development, agriculture and pharmaceuticals. So these are the certain areas where we have advantage over other countries in the African continent, and this particular areas we could actually leverage, and India could have a long-term presence in these sectors. And in fact, there are some crucial lessons that India can actually learn from its own engagement. Learn for its own engagement. The first lesson is that India must emphasize on continuity in its engagement with Africa. So there should be a continuity rather than discontinuing regularly its engagement with African continent. We need to continuously engage with the African continent. And last India Africa Forum Summit was held in the year 2015, and now we are living in almost a decade, because the last India Africa Forum Summit was held in 2015. Now remember that this is very important for both prelims and mains examination, because in the year 2016 this India Africa Forum Summit was already asked in the preliminary examination, because this was held in the year 2015 and 2016 there was a question on this. So therefore it is very, very important. So the last India Africa Forum Summit was held in 2015, but if India wants to capitalize on the relations that it has actually built, or in fact India has recent times has taken a number of initiatives, particularly the inclusion of African Union into the G20 under the India's presidency. So we need to continue this particular momentum, because we have generated a lot of goodwill, a lot of trust in the African continent, in the entire African continent, because whenever we invest in the African continent, so we invest in the capacity building, so we invest in the human resources development, we invest in the poverty alleviation, right? So it is not like a predatory financing policies of China. Rather, we invest in the long-term sustainability of those respective countries. So hence we invest in the capacity building of those respective countries. And apart from that, India has taken up an initiative, and India has also introduced a resolution to include African Union into the G20 summit under its presidency. So therefore we must capitalize this particular momentum, and India must hold this India Africa Forum Summit for at the earliest stage, and this was the third India Africa Forum Summit. So that was held in 2015, and in fact an India African Union track 1.5 dialogue could be set up to deliberate on issues of mutual interest as well. Now apart from India Africa Forum Summit, so we could alternatively can also conduct India African Union track 1.5 dialogue, and this particular dialogue could be set up to deliberate on issues of mutual interest as well. So India could actually play a central role in strengthening integration of the African economies, and this is in the long-term interest of India into the global value chains, and also supporting the African industrialization. It is in the best interest of India. And India will also build a long-term relations with the countries in the African continent. So if India integrated the African economies into the global value chains, and in fact if India supports Africa's industrialization, that will be a win-win situation for both India and Africa as well. And in fact Indian companies in Africa must look for a higher value added investments in sectors, specifically agriculture sector, food processing sector, pharmaceutical and even manufacturing sector. So most of these sectors are labor intensive sectors, and labor intensive sectors would create a large scale and gainful employment opportunities for the people or the demographic dividend in the African continent. Hence it will be a win-win situation, and it will generate a long-term goodwill and trust on India's investments in Africa. And in fact the African continent would welcome India's investments in these number of areas, because India has advantage in these sectors, and India also has the competence and even expertise in these respective sectors. And the idea is to set up a manufacturing basis in African countries and the entire African continent, and that will help create employment opportunities, and even that would also serve the local markets in the African continent. So however, as a whole we need to encourage the greater Indian private sector participation, and also we need to find innovative financing solutions in the African continent. So India is also known for its technology or rapidly developing technology and innovative solutions. And one such area that India can actually have a strong presence in the African continent in the area of digital transactions. So we all knew that India is a leader in the global digital transactions. So unified payment interface, we all knew about that, which is also known as UPI, and RuPay services are already established in Mauritius. And therefore, so this UPI and RuPay services were not just introduced or established in Mauritius, but they are also present in Kenya, Namibia, Ghana, Mozambique, and they have also shown interest in utilizing the UPI platform as well. And in fact, the African countries are increasingly taking a greater ownership of their strategic thinking, and their citizens are actually demanding accountability from their governments to ensure that their economies move up the value chain. Now, it's not like before. Africa is known as continent of hope, and people in Africa have been demanding more and more accountability from their governments. So therefore, in future, it would be more likely that those countries and those partners of Africa who are genuine and who are genuinely interested in the development of Africa, and who believe in the idea that the development of Africa would bring in development and prosperity to their respective countries. So such investments and such developmental projects would be welcomed in the African continent in the future. So therefore, it would offer an opportunity for India, because one thing that we need to remember is India and Africa share historical relations. Right from before independence also. So because the entire African continent was under the colonial rule. So when India became independent, India very strongly advocated for the decolonization of the African continent, and India has supported the independence movement in the African continent, and India has fought against the racism and anti-apartheid movements. So because of all these reasons, we have historical connections with the African continent, and we could actually build on those historical connections. And don't forget non-aligned movement. And in this non-alignment movement during the Cold War times, where India has led this non-alignment movement, and most of these African countries were part of this non-alignment movement. So all these areas are strong connecting factors of India and Africa, and therefore we should actually leverage this opportunity, and we should also further step up our engagement with the African continent, and that is in the best interest of our national interest. And you can also go through some data about India's engagement with the African continent given here. So next important article is Colombo Security Conclave. So we'll try to understand what exactly is this Colombo Security Conclave. The context is that the member states of the Colombo Security Conclave, which is also known as CESC, recently signed a charter and memorandum of understanding for the establishment of Colombo Security Conclave Secretariat in Colombo. So it is decided that this Colombo Security Conclave Secretariat will be established in Colombo, Sri Lanka. And in fact, this Colombo Security Conclave is a regional security grouping, and this regional security grouping, Colombo Security Conclave, comprising of India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives and Mauritius. So these are the 5 countries which are part of the Colombo Security Conclave. However, when you look into the core objectives of this Colombo Security Conclave, so its core objectives include promotion of regional security by addressing transnational threats and challenges of common concern to the member states. However, so if we look into the origin of the Colombo Security Conclave, the Colombo Security Conclave, initially known as Trilateral for Maritime Security Cooperation. This was its initial name. However, it evolved out of trilateral meetings between the national security advisors and deputy national security advisors of countries India, Maldives and Sri Lanka. So that was started in the year 2011 way back. However, it came into a standstill after 2014 due to the rising tensions between India and Maldives, where anti-India government came to power in Maldives, led by Abdullah Yamin, so who is strongly pro-China and anti-India, and that has led to disruptions in a strong bilateral and even trilateral relations between India and Maldives, and even that has impacted this trilateral maritime cooperation between the national security advisors and deputy national security advisors. However, since its revival and rebranding as a Colombo Security Conclave in the year 2020, Mauritius and more recently Bangladesh were also added as a members of this grouping of Colombo Security Conclave. So however, the current members of the Colombo Security Conclave will include India, Bangladesh, Maldives, Mauritius and Sri Lanka. So you just have to remember, this is also very important for your prelims examination. So these are the member countries of Colombo Security Conclave. However, there is also one observer nation, which is Seychelles. It is an island nation in the southern Indian Ocean. So this Colombo Security Conclave would actually brings together national security advisors and deputy national security advisors of all the member countries of the Colombo Security Conclave. And when the national security advisors and deputy national security advisors would come together, and they would actually discuss different areas of cooperation. So particularly cooperation under the conclave, Colombo Security Conclave, would focuses on five very important pillars. So they including maritime safety and security, and counter-terrorism, radicalization and combating trafficking, transnational organized crime, cyber security and protection of critical infrastructure, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and its permanent security secretariat is located in Colombo. So these are the five pillars of the Colombo Security Conclave that the cooperation actually generally spans from. And in fact, if you look at all the countries which are part of the Colombo Security Conclave, so all these countries have been facing these critical issues: the maritime piracy, terrorism, organized crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and transnational organized crime, cyber security or cyber crime. So all are the major challenges that these countries have been facing from long. And therefore, so all these countries would come together and they would discuss ways to tackle these specific challenges, and the permanent secretariat of this Colombo Security Conclave is located in Colombo. And next important article is about unified lending interface. So we will understand about this unified lending interface, because a unified lending interface in recent times in news, and therefore there is a higher chance that this unified lending interface may be asked in your prelims examination or even your mains examination as part of general studies paper 3 in the economy section. So therefore it is very important that we try to understand what exactly is this unified lending interface. The context is that the Reserve Bank of India, as part of its strategy to create a digital public infrastructure in the country or across the country. Now, already we have a huge digital public infrastructure, and there are efforts which are being made to create a large-scale digital public infrastructure across the country. The Reserve Bank of India has actually announced a new technology platform, and this new technology platform, which is announced by the Reserve Bank of India, is called as Unified Lending Interface, or ULI. Okay, so like Unified Payment Interface for the digital transactions or online payments. So in a similar way, this Unified Lending Interface is recently announced by the Reserve Bank of India, and it would be introduced by Reserve Bank's Innovation Hub, which is based out in Bengaluru, which will enable the frictionless credit to the farmers and even MSME borrowers to begin with, right? So this is the overall objective of the Unified Lending Interface. So that is introduced by the Reserve Bank's Innovation Hub, Bengaluru. So its objective is to provide frictionless credit to farmers and MSME borrowers in the initial stages. Now we'll understand what is specific details with respect to the Unified Lending Interface. So Unified Lending Interface is a platform that facilitates a seamless flow of customers' digitized financial and non-financial data, right? So all the financial and non-financial data of the customers would be pulled in, and when any customer is taking a loan or any customer is taking a credit, all the information would be properly analyzed, and that would result in the quick dispersal of credit to the customers, right? So there will be no paperwork, there will be no delays, and quick dispersal of. So in India, in the banking system, one of the key problems that we have been facing is delays in the dispersal of credit. So that is one of the main challenge, but this unified lending interface is a platform that would facilitate a seamless flow of customers' digitized financial and non-financial data, so from the multiple data service providers to the lenders, right? So in India we have lenders such as app-based digital lenders, and even banking lenders, and even non-banking finance companies. So therefore it would help in making credit underwriting seamless and even customers journey frictionless for a diverse range of borrowers, and that is the key objective of unified lending interface. And this particular platform will facilitate seamless and consent based flow of digital information that includes even land records on various states also will be provided by this unified lending interface, and it will also help in reducing the complexity of multiple technical integrations, and it will also enable the borrowers to get the benefit of seamless delivery of credit and even quicker turnaround time without requiring extensive and time consuming documents, right? So when we have this unified lending interface, so the banks and other lenders would quickly analyze all the data with respect to the borrowers, and once they analyze all the data, and they could actually make an assessment of the credit worthiness of a particular borrower, and that would particularly help in quick dispersal of loans to the borrower. So therefore quick dispersal of loans would help the borrowers, and even it would also make the credit lending process hassle free. And how this unified lending interface would actually work. So unified lending interface facilitates access to data about loan applicants' economic activities, and it also allows financial sector players to access the data by connecting to the platform through plug and play model as well. And with the help of unified lending interface, the lenders can actually and immediately know the income of the loan applicant and even the credit eligibility as well, and the decision making would be automated, and loans could be sanctioned and even dispersed within minutes, and it will not take months and even days also when it comes to providing loans to the eligible beneficiaries by programming the end use for purchase of agricultural inputs. Now remember that whenever banks have been giving loans to the farmers would use such loans for purchasing inputs, and those inputs would be used in the farmlands. So therefore the end use programming within this unified lending interface, the unified lending interface platform can actually give a required comfort to banks, and thus establish the identity of a farmer not through his land holding but through a end use of funds being dispersed to the farmers. So therefore it will essentially benefit the banks to analyze whether the farmers have been using the loans which are being dispersed are used in a right manner in the purpose that they have taken these loans. How this unified lending interface would actually it has started, or it had started. The Reserve Bank of India had on August 10, 2023 announced setting up of a public tech platform for frictionless credit, which is now branded as the unified lending interface. And in fact, so with the rapid progress in the digitization that has been taking place in India, data required for credit appraisal must be available at a single point for a digital credit delivery to all the eligible borrowers. And in fact, the pilot project for the digitization of Kisan credit card loans of less than 1.6 lakh began in September 2022. So this is all about the unified lending interface program that the Reserve Bank of India has initiated for a seamless credit delivery to the eligible borrowers. And today we have one important mains practice question, and this practice question is very important from the general studies paper 3 point of view, particularly the internal security dimension. So this is very important question. The question is, how does illegal trans-border migration poses a threat to India's security, and discuss strategies to curb this, bringing out the factors which actually or usually give impetus to such migration. And this is the question. And in fact, in this question, so first you need to define what is illegal transboundary migration, and in fact you could also write some data about this illegal transboundary migration coming into India, and then you need to write how illegal transboundary migration pose a threat to India's security. This would be the first dimension of the question. And then the next dimension of the question, you just have to discuss the strategies that can be used to curb this illegal transboundary migration, and you could also write some reasons which have been giving impetus to such a migration into India. And so in the introduction you can define what exactly is this illegal transboundary migration. So illegal migration usually refers to migration of people across the national borders in a way that usually violates the immigration laws, or we can say that it is not legal. There's no proper documents, right? So in fact, India has witnessed the immigration since its independence because of the porous borders that we have with our neighbors, and we are also located in the complex neighborhood. Because of these reasons, India has been witnessing illegal immigration since independence, and people who have faced religious and even political persecution, economic and social discrimination, and cultural repression in India's neighborhood. And even people who faced the curbs on personal freedom have made India their home, so they started migrating back to India. So for all the kinds of migration, illegal migration has become the most volatile, and it is one of the most contentious issues that Indian polity today became the socio-political conflict, and it has brought in its wake. Now if you look at the entire northeastern part of India, particularly a state like Assam, so these states, there's a lot of illegal immigration from people from particularly from Myanmar and Bangladesh coming and settling in the volatile northeastern part of India. So that is a cause of concern which has been resultant in insurgency movements, ethnic conflicts, and secessionist movements in the entire northeastern part of India, and that has resulted in violence and instability. So that would be very difficult, right? So very difficult for the governments to control such a violence which has been taking place in the northeastern part of India. So what are the factors which have been influencing illegal transboundary migration in India? So there are certain factors which have been influencing the illegal transboundary migration. So they including the relatively better economic prospects in India is one reason. So it is acting as a pull factor, right? So in migration or illegal immigration, there are both pull factors and push factors also. For example, the situation in Bangladesh, situation in now present day Bangladesh, Hindus have been facing the religious persecution of Hindus in Bangladesh. So that would make them they have no option except India. So that would be a push factor. That would not be a full factor. That would be a push factor. So but better economic prospects in India would be a pull factor for migrants from countries like Bangladesh and even Sri Lanka coming and settling in different parts of India as illegal immigrants. And there's also huge political instability and even conflict in neighboring countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, so even Afghanistan also. So therefore one example would be Sri Lankan civil war that was started by liberation of Tamil tigers Elam. So all these factors have actually driven people to seek refuge in India. And climate change induced disasters in recent times are also another major factor, and which are becoming notable driver of migration, particularly from Bangladesh low-lying areas. And even shared linguistic and cultural ties would facilitate integration of migrants into the local population, as witnessed with Sri Lanka's Tamils in Tamil Nadu. And the other factors include, so that we need to talk about, is threat to Indian security. So how illegal immigration would be a threat to the Indian security. So it in fact it impacts the interests of local populations in the areas seeing a large scale influxes of illegal migration. And we all knew that northeast India is ethnically very sensitive and it is a volatile region, but illegal immigration from Bangladesh and Myanmar has been causing this ethnic stir in the northeastern part of India, and that would be a cause of concern because it has resulted in the non-violence and instability in the entire northeastern part of India. And this illegal immigration also increases political instability when leaders start mobilizing the perception of citizens of the country against the migrants by the elites to grab the political power. And in fact, in order to appease the illegal immigrants who have illegally acquired even Aadhaar cards and voter IDs, the political parties have been start playing this immigration card, or even trying to appease the immigrants so to get their votes as well. So therefore it results in a mainstreaming of the illegal immigrants into the Indian society. So that would be another factor. And persistent attacks against the Muslims perceived as illegal migrants has given way to the radicalization, and that would be another problem, and that would result in militancy. And in recent decades, trafficking of women and human smuggling have become a quite rampant across the borders, and sorry, the rule of law and integrity of the country are undermined by the illegal migrants who are engaged in illegal and anti-national activities. And these are the national security threats, and we cannot rule out the possibility of these illegal immigrants conducting or planning terrorist activities in India. So that would also be a threat for India. So that is the reason that India refused to provide refuge to the Rohingya Muslim minorities who were displaced from the Rakhine state of Myanmar. So however, there are certain strategies that could be used to curb such immigration. So those strategies include the bilateral cooperation between India and those respective countries. So India has sought to bolster cooperation with its neighbors, and most importantly, the 2015 land boundary agreement with Bangladesh is a significant milestone in this regard. And enhanced surveillance is also very important, and India has significantly beefed up its border security, and a comprehensive integrated border management system project leverages technology for enhanced border monitoring. And Tamil Nadu coastal security has been further strengthened, so that would prevent illegal maritime migration from Sri Lanka into India. And there are certain legal measures also which were taken, and the government has undertaken legal measures such as National Register of Citizens in Assam and the Citizenship Amendment Act at the national level. However, these initiatives have sparked a significant debate due to their potential humanitarian implications. So ultimately you could conclude this answer. So addressing the challenge of illegal transboundary migration, which actually requires a nuanced, a multi-pronged, a holistic approach, and the factors insecurity, imperatives, and socio-economic dynamics and humanitarian concerns have to be taken into consideration, and all stakeholders must be consulted in taking strong measures against the illegal immigration. The intensity and multidimensional aspects of this issue underscore the need for comprehensive and sustainable solutions in this regard, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. If you like our work, so please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.